Hey everybody, it's your old pal Uncle Phil, and it's Easter weekend 2026. And um and of course, given the nature of my channel, that there's a lot that I need to address here. So I'm gonna try to keep this as tight as possible, but I'm also kind of trying to make up for a week when I couldn't record much because I have family in town from, out of the country, and it's not a lot of chances to record. So I have this window. Everybody's gone from the house. It's just me and Dottie, the wonder dog, and she's asleep on the sofa in the other room. So we're gonna try to get something done here. And I'm going to try to walk you through a couple of important things about Easter that, Easter is one of those things it's so familiar because we're all like, yeah. Well, I say everyone's so familiar. I actually have met people who are like, yeah, it's about the bunny and the chocolates and the eggs. And but assuming you're aware that it has some religious connotation, then, this is the weekend Jesus died and rose from the grave. Right. And it's one of those things where we get so familiar and so comfortable that we're like, I think I know this one. Yeah. In fact, when I was a preacher, when I had to preach every Sunday, you kind of dreaded Easter and Christmas because that's when everybody showed up. But you're like, they already know the story. Like, I'm not gonna do anything they haven't heard, And I'm not suggesting I have anything you haven't heard, but sometimes it's just an issue of slowing down so that you can kind of look and say, I forgot about that, or I didn't think about that detail. So just a couple of things I want to go over. All right. I'm going to try to keep it quick. But the first one is, Easter, arguably the most important holiday in the Christian calendar. Important because, this is this moment where, God in human form, dies and then comes back to life. And it's all done to somehow bring redemption to humanity. This is not a small thing. Like, let's just call it like it is. That's a biggie. But if you ever stopped and asked, so why this way? Why do it this way? And there's a couple of things that people sort of lock in on, right? Like, one, we're going to talk about the whole substitutionary atonement idea because it's a lot of people really don't like it, especially these days. I've noticed, like, people send me things, send me reels and TikTok videos and stuff like that, where you have typically ex-evangelicals, which, hey, no hate, I'd call myself one too, but in many cases they've also just abandoned all faith altogether. But they're really like, oh, and substitutionary atonement's obviously, of course, Christianity's screwed up because anything that believes in anything this brutal and horrible. I'm gonna try to redeem substitutionary atonement. That's a funny one right there. But I'm going to try to kind of make an argument that it's not nearly as bad as you think, and I'll explain in a minute. But it really starts with the fact that this wasn't Jesus' first day on the job. That Easter, like Easter weekend, like if you want to argue that this is the most important moment, have you ever asked the question, why didn't Jesus just show up like 5 minutes before showtime? Like a rock star who's like, comes rolling in 5 minutes before curtain is like, all right, I'll do the show. Like, why didn't he just do that? Because if it's just about, we just need to satisfy this sort of legal idea, this a holy God and sinful people need to be reconciled through a sacrifice, and he could just say, all right, I'm here. I left the car running because it's just going to be a weekend. So let's just get this done. And just, like, wander out of a cave, die on a cross. The whole why not just show up that way? You ever just ask those questions? I ask those questions. I like to ask things like that. Like, so why didn't God do it the other way? And not that I know the mind of God. I'm not suggesting that I can just blanketly say, well, here's why God did it. But I think part of it is to remember that he didn't just show up. Jesus didn't just show up 5 minutes before the show. He showed up, 30 some odd years earlier in, through the birth canal, not through the VIP lounge. He showed up as a human and as the weak, vulnerable human who would suffer all the indignities, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that come with being human. 30 some odd years of that. I keep saying 30 some odd because 33, which traditional is not probably accurate. We don't really know. Somewhere in there, 30 plus years. The point is, He lived this entire life. And there's something really important about that. You know, and I don't want to steal the thunder of Christmas, because eventually I'll get to Advent and we'll talk about that too. But it's so important to remember that Jesus didn't just show up to do a sacrifice and get out. Okay. He lived an entire life. And I would argue some of that is so that he can actually be a God who relates totally, fully, intimately with his own creation, which is weird when you look at the pantheon of gods out there that people could potentially worship. Most of them are all like humans. They're okay for like slavery and, rape and doing what I want them to do. But they're I'm way better than them. And I talked about this earlier in the week when I did my other video from the Philippians thing about, Jesus, he humbled himself to the point of becoming human. The fact that God would put on skin and wander around like us, not for 5 minutes, not for a week, not for a vacation, but for a life from birth to adulthood is crazy, man. And I think that the kicker here is if you look at like Hebrews, I think it's Hebrews chapter 4, where it says we have a high priest who is sympathetic to weakness because he existed in our form and he endured every temptation that we had and yet didn't fall to temptation, but he knows what it's like to be human and to endure this life. He gets it. He understands completely because he did that. And that's the first piece that's really important, is this is not the first thing Jesus does. This is kind of the end of the job. But the first part's really important, and you don't want to lose sight of that, because it isn't just about the sacrifice. It's about a God who knows you intimately, who cares, who wanted to walk, we talk about, you should walk a mile in someone's shoes. Like, God, if anybody had a pass on that, it would be the guy who created us, God. He'd go, well, I don't really need to go walk a mile in their shoes because I made them and I'm all knowing. But Jesus literally went through that. And there's other reasons why he could have lived the 30 some odd years, is because, that way he could be the one who endured all the temptations and everything. And by the way, I have to stop because there's always somebody who's like, oh, you didn't endure all the temptations because he never got tempted with heroin or insider trading. Okay. Great. Gotcha. So, but all forms, like all categories of like the temptation to anesthetize yourself or your baser appetites or greed or cheating, or he got offered all the options on the transgression buffet. Trust me, they were all presented to him. Remember that whole temptation with the devil? That's, where he was offered everything, the kingdoms of the world were shown to him and told, this can all be yours. Like, he endured every temptation. And yet, unlike me, who pretty much falls to most of my temptations because, it's me, he didn't. And yet, that didn't make him go, golly, Phil, you're a piece of shit. I didn't. No, in fact, it made him compassionate. That's that whole Hebrews 4 thing. He's sympathetic to weakness. Okay, anyhow. More on the incarnation at Christmas time. But that's important to remember. Easter's not the beginning of the story. It's the end of the story, kind of. One could argue it's the middle, but we're not going to get technical on that right now. So you get there. And so then there's this whole thing with a substitutionary atonement. And you may have heard penal substitutionary atonement, which, anyhow, the idea is that like God's wrath, or this sort of this law of right and wrong, had to be satisfied. And so God kills Jesus, who does not deserve it, in place of all of us who do deserve it. And, like Paul writes about this, like maybe one person could die for another person, but it wouldn't really solve the problem. It'd be like me saying, I'll pay your Citibank credit card bill, but then Citibank's like, that's nice, but who's going to pay your Citibank credit card bill, Phil? And like, it's all just, there's a lot of complex theology in there. But the bigger issue is people don't like the idea that God somehow manifests grace and love through this incredibly brutal act of the crucifixion on an innocent person, which I don't mean air quotes that he's innocent, but it's more layered than that. He is innocent, but it's even bigger than that. And here's what I want to say is it is brutal and it is horrendous what Christ endured. But the argument that God was somehow detached doing it to him misses the whole idea of the Trinity. When God does this, he's doing it in a sense to himself. If we're going to hold to Trinitarian theology that God exists in three persons in one, then in a sense, what God is doing is he's doing it to himself. I know that may seem convoluted, but hear me out. My point is think about yourself. This is not a good Trinitarian argument. I'm already any Trinitarian purists. There's a whole bunch of Trinitarian watchdogs out there who are like, if you try to make an analogy, by God, if you try to make an analogy explaining the Trinity, we're coming at you like guns a-blazing. Don't you dare. I know you will. It's fine. My point is not really to say this is a direct analogy to the Trinity. My point is that as a human being, I have different hats that I wear, right? Like I have my maybe my own person. I have my spousal hat, like I'm a married man. I have my work hat, like at work. I have my child hat. I'm a child to parents. My parents are dead now, but I lived as a child of Bill and Shirley Bryan. I am a parent myself. I have children of my own. And here's what you find is sometimes what happens is you make sacrifices in these relationships, okay? You make sacrifices for the sake of those relationships. So like, I feel like I got a whole secondary set of understandings about God when I became a parent, because there were things that made no sense to me about God, some of the moves he made and things he did until I had children of my own. And then I'm like, oh, this feels very familiar. I think I get why God did that. Like, I think I understand a sort of, in a tiny, minute 0.00001% way. I think I kind of get it. And what I mean is, when you have children, they're going to break your heart on some level. And I don't mean that to sound depressing or cruel or like I don't like my kids. I just mean there's no way your kids can frankly be what you probably are envisioning them to be, right? You have your children and you can't help it. You're like, I hope they grow up to be, and you may not have a specific thing, but you have an idea of what you want your children to be like. And they won't be. Very likely they will not be. And they may, in fact, openly like reject everything you try to, imbue them with and build into them and teach them. And they may just like do a giant screw you, dad kind of thing. The point is you go into this knowing on some level, like there will be sacrifices will have to be made. And you know who's going to have to make them? Me. I will have to compensate for my children's failures at times. I knew that going into it. I hoped it wasn't very often. And honestly, I love my kids. My kids are great. And I don't like my kids thing. I'm just saying there were things where you had to compensate and you just had to eat it, like things your kids mess up and you're like, I'm just going to eat the cost of that. Whether it's an actual cost, whether it's an emotional cost, whether it's a relational cost, like I'll take the hit. I'll just take the hit. And you do it, why? Because you love your kids. You do it because you love your kids so much. You would die for your kids. Oh, wait, there's our connection to Easter. You see, the thing is that God, when he's doing this to Jesus, in a sense, he's doing it to himself. And that's because the Godhead looked and said, I love this creation so much before they're even created and before they know, but before they've even existed, I know what they're going to do and they're going to betray me. And I love them so much, I will go ahead and build in the mechanism to redeem them. Now, if that isn't love, I don't know what is. Go read Paradise Lost, book 3 or 4, something like that. I don't know. Check it out. But there's this conversation that happens. It's after the whole rebellion of the devil. Lucifer rebels and everything, and then there's this thing where God's like, okay, I'm going to make the earth and I'm going to make humans, and he's like, ugh. But because I'm God and I'm sovereign and all knowing, they're gonna blow it too. They're gonna use their free will to transgress. But I'm going to redeem them. Unlike the devil, which I'm gonna, he rebelled and he didn't, he's on his own. No one tempted him to do this. He's gonna tempt them to do it, which is kind of unfair pool. Now, again, Paradise Lost is a work of fiction. This is Milton imagining all this, but it's a really interesting thought to think, if we believe God is outside of time, and if we believe God is all-knowing, and we believe that he's aware of what's happening before he ever made people, he knew they were going to screw up, and he knew he was going to have to compensate. And in this scene, he's like, we're going to have to sort it out. Is anybody willing to sort it out? And Jesus is like, I'll do it. I'm happy to do it. And that's where you go now back to the Bible, Isaiah 53. There's this line that says, God was pleased to crush him for the iniquities of the world. It doesn't mean he's like, woohoo, get to kill Jesus. Yay. It's not that. It's, I'm so willing to do this because I have so much love for my creation. I'm willing to do this, again, in a sense, to myself, to cover this. Speaking of great scenes from old literature, Titus Andronicus, okay, this play by Shakespeare that's lesser known, but super violent, bloody. I read somebody, they were like, this is like an exploitation B-movie horror flick. It's so bloody and gruesome. And it kind of is. But there's this scene where the main character, Titus, he has 3 sons and a daughter, and he has lots of sons, but living at this point, surviving the wars. And 2 of them get taken by the emperor under false accusation for a crime they didn't commit, and he's like going to execute them. And then his other son gets banished, and his other daughter gets horrible violence committed against her. And so it's miserable, and Titus is in just despair over everything that's going on, and he's pleading and pleading and pleading to the tribunes of Rome, just please spare my sons, please spare my sons. And then this guy shows up, okay? He shows up, and he's a bad dude. Aaron is his name, and he's like Iago in Othello. He just likes to do bad stuff. He's a bad dude. And he shows up, and he goes, oh, Titus, good news. The emperor says he'll spare your sons' lives if you'll cut your hand off and give it to him. Okay? Now, it's going to turn out that Aaron is lying, that this no deal was made, and it was just him being nasty, and he thinks it's funny to watch this once great Roman general Titus cut his own hand off. But the bargain that he's offering, as far as Titus knows, it's a legit offer. And he says, he says, absolutely. Like, he doesn't hesitate. He's like, cut my hand off right now. Do it. And after it gets cut off, he says, I consider this, take this to the emperor and tell him that if my sons live, that their jewels purchased at an easy price. Like, I would never trade, I happily. And that's that idea. It was his pleasure to crush him. Titus is like, I'm happy to do that. Like, to save my children's lives, wouldn't hesitate. Cut my hand off, take it, done. Again, you should go watch the play. If you can find it, there's a version with Anthony Hopkins playing Titus that's just mind-blowing. I don't know if it's available anywhere to stream, but if you can find it. Anyhow, side note, sorry. Literature teacher. But the point is that's the idea here. When we talk about this substitutionary atonement being so brutal and horrible, yes, and at the same time, it's so much an act of love. That's the part I think people lose out on. And again, maybe it's that you haven't had kids or a pet or I don't know, but the lengths we go to for the people we love, we don't hesitate. And we would take terrible hits. We would endure horrors for those we love. So the horror, in a way, demonstrates the depths of the love, which I think is an important thing to catch in this. So first, the incarnation, the cross is not the first thing. Number 2, it is brutal, but it is also love, man. It's just totally love. And then the last thing is the resurrection, man. The resurrection. Here's the thing. Even if there were no resurrection from the dead, I still think following Jesus is the smart move in terms of how the world works, because it is still, in a way, the most counterintuitive way to live in terms of loving your neighbor and serving your neighbor and trying to be selfless. And I think you can look around the world and see what not being selfless and not loving your neighbor looks like. And it's shitty. It's bad. Run for the hills. I think we're seeing right now a lot of examples of people who are like, just take what you can, get what you want, do whatever horrors, you can, and just whatever. I mean, it's just, I think you can go, you shouldn't take long on your news feed to figure out what I'm talking about on about 20 different levels. The point is that even if there were no resurrection, I still think love your neighbor, treat others as more important than yourself would be a really nice world to live in if we all followed it. But if there is a resurrection, if there is eternal life, if there is life after you die, if there is something beyond this, when you shuffle off this mortal coil, then man, that's something I want to know about. That's something I want to figure out. Something I don't want to just leave it to chance, right? So how amazing that if Jesus is in fact God in the flesh, and he in fact does die as a sinless sacrifice, and then he comes back from the dead, thereby defeating the law of death, which was instituted in Genesis 3 when Jesus says, if you transgress, you'll surely die. Jesus now comes and says, actually, I'm going to undo the curse. I'm going to undo that idea, and I'm going to remove that promise of the curse of death and make it possible for you to not experience that death. Like, stop and think about that. That's amazing. And that's really something. The Apostle Paul says, if there is no resurrection of the dead, we're above all men to be pitied. Agree to disagree. I see what he's getting at. Like, why bother living a life of serving others if there's no sort of eternal state and reward? But again, I still think the world's a nicer place if we're nice to each other. Call me crazy. But the bottom line is, I think I hope there's a resurrection. I'm betting the farm on it. I hope there is. I believe to the degree that I can believe. See also my I believe, help my unbelief video. To the degree that I'm capable of belief at all, Mr. Skeptical, like I got issues, but to the degree that I believe anything at all, man, I'm gonna put hope in the idea that there is a life never ending, and the possibility of that life never ending being free from all the bullshit and pain and suffering and horrors that we see every day. Sign me up. How do I get that? Well, it turns out I don't have to work for it. I don't have to be extra special good, as the guy on the cross next to Jesus proved. It was just an issue of going, wow, so you're doing this for me? Thank you. Please let me come with you. Let me be with you in paradise. Please. I acknowledge I can't do it. I need you. That's a pretty good deal, man. That's a pretty good deal. I guess we'll all find out when we die, but I'm hoping, I'm betting on it. So there you go. There's some thoughts on Easter, some important stuff. Remember, this is the culmination of a life lived in among human beings, to know human beings, to do good to human beings, to heal human beings, to feed human beings, to encourage, to redeem human beings. And then this is the ultimate act of redemption. There was all the sort of little r redemptions, redeeming of blind eyes and broken limbs and bleeding bodies and broken hearts. And then there's the big R redemption, which is your very soul can be saved, man. That's just amazing. That's great. And yes, it is brutal what took place. That it's called Good Friday is odd. I get why it's good, but I tend to call it Crucifixion Friday, because that's the thing, man. I'd rather call it Love Friday, because what an act of love it was. No greater love has this than he will lay down his life for his brother, man. That this is the ultimate act of love. And that it didn't stop there, but results in resurrection and the promise of life new. This is good news of great joy for all people. For today in the city of David is born for you a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. There it is. Sorry, I keep dragging Christmas into it. They go together. You kind of can't. Anyhow. So for the playlist today, on theme. The playlist today is 3 songs. 3 songs, because I had 3 points. Now it's 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. No, I have 3. So the first 2 are a package deal. They are from Wynton Marsalis's album, The Majesty of the Blues. And he did this thing at the end of the album where he did what's called the New Orleans Function, which is a New Orleans Function was a New Orleans funeral. And if you don't know anything about this, the idea is when you would have a funeral in New Orleans, I've actually seen this. I've been in New Orleans and seen the people walking down the street doing this. You have your band, your band's playing, and they're playing a dirge, a mournful, horrible, sad dirge, marching slowly to the grave, right? They go to they're just going along, and it's just awful, horrible. And they get to the grave, they put the body in the ground, they have the sermon at the grave, and the sermon talks about death, but then it culminates in the resurrection, which, we're celebrating this weekend, Crucifixion Friday and Resurrection Sunday. And it culminates with that, and then when they leave the grave, the family, they're all marked, the band strikes up this super upbeat thing, because now it's, we march to death, but then we remember that there's life. And so he made this package. He called it the Death of Jazz. He was, but the picture is a funeral one. And this was a favorite. My dad and I, both being huge jazz fans, we love this. And every year on see that I keep doing it. Every year on Easter, my dad would call on Good Friday. He'd call and he'd go, "Have you started listening to it yet? Have you started listening to it?" And Sunday morning he'd call and go, "Have you listened to it yet this morning?" These 2 pieces, the sermon in the middle is this sort of long thing about there's the music underneath it, but you can listen to it, but it's this sort of story of Duke Ellington and jazz and whatever. But the 2 pieces that surround it, the Death of Jazz, and then the last one's called "Oh, But on the Third Day," Happy Feet Blues. Those 2 are just fantastic because they're this package, and you hear it, the dirge, the sadness, the horror, and then the jubilation, man, when things go differently, when there's hope and there's resurrection. So those 2 are the first 2. And then the third one is Amazing Grace, which, how easy is that to pick? But I put the Sufjan Stevens one from his first set of Christmas albums. Just because I love Sufjan Stevens. He's just fantastic. But really, really good stuff. And just to look at those lyrics, man, Amazing Grace that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost and now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. When I was, I grew up in church, heard Amazing Grace all the time. And I did this thing because, again, I write about, when I was in high school and I became a person who only listened to jazz and didn't listen to pop music because I was an elitist, and I still kind of am sometimes. But I went through this thing where I was like, I don't like Amazing Grace because everybody likes it. It's too popular. Everybody likes it, whatever. And I was like these weird, obscure hymns in church. Already the nerd factor. I have, the favorite hymns thing. But somewhere in my 30s, I was suddenly like, gosh dang, Amazing Grace is fantastic. There's a reason it's so popular, because that message of grace, man, that's what we all need. That's what I keep banging on about. We're so sad and hurting, man. We're so sad and hurting that we're just like, ugh. And to hear grace, man, to hear grace, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So Amazing Grace, check it out. Oh, and yeah, I was going to bring up one other sort of theological point that I failed to mention earlier, but it's already too long. I'm going to stop. I'll do it another day. There'll be an occasion. I'm sure there will be an occasion to talk about it, but leave him wanting more. Is anybody wanting more? Anyhow, there you go. So there's my thoughts on Easter weekend, and there's 3 songs for the playlist. Go check them out. Spotify and Apple Music, the Uncle Phil playlist. You can find them. Links will be in the description. And just remember, guys, again, it's Easter. God loves you, man. If you can't figure out this weekend that God loves you, then you really are missing the plot. Because this weekend, again, it has death, but it has resurrection, and it's all done because of God's great love for us. So just don't miss that, man. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what you will do, God loves you. Okay? Just please know that. As for Uncle Phil, I wish grace, peace, and love to everyone.